Hi everyone and welcome to another video of Echo Base Gaming. Today another deck tag is on the menu. In my previous deck tag with Tarkin I said that the next deck tag was going to be a Cassian Ender deck. So now we are here with a Cassian and it's actually a little bit of a different deck tag when you compare it to Tarkin. Because with Tarkin, I already tested the deck, and this was basically sort of my final product of the Tarkin deck. I think that deck is a really powerful deck that can function quite well against the meta. But now with Cassian, I actually wanted to show you the starting point for this deck. So not just the final product, but the starting point for this deck, and in the future also show the changes that I made to the deck to maybe give a little bit of insight on the deck building process, and also maybe for new players or players that are new to deck building, that you don't build the perfect 50 cards from the start. You do need to test the deck, you do need to make changes. Yeah, basically I just wanted to show you the starting point and also to give a little bit of insight to the process and the changes that this deck went through. So maybe before we dive into the deck, I just want to talk a little bit about testing the deck and strategies for testing the deck. When the competitive circuit starts, I will do a more in-depth video about deck building and also about how do you test the deck. Because just playing games and actually testing the deck are two different things. Don't get me wrong, you do need reps with the deck. So playing matches against your friends or people at your local game store are great for getting a better understanding of the deck. But testing a deck is a completely different thing. So when you're testing a certain deck, you are analyzing the cards in your deck. So are there cards currently in the deck that every time that you draw them, they are just dead cards in your hand and you most of the times just resource them? Maybe that's a good indication to drop the card from your deck list and change it for another card. Also with testing, you analyze the flow of the deck. So when is your deck the strongest in the game? Are there certain combinations that are really powerful? What cards are the MVPs? Are there certain cards that you definitely want to see in your opening hand? All these things are something that you want to analyze and see for yourself, of course. Because it is one thing to copy a deck from the internet or from someone else that won a tournament. It's not a guaranteed that you also can win a tournament with that deck. Especially once the competitive circuit starts to pop up and you see more, competitive tournament lists on the internet, then you can expect more niche cards in those decks or cards that are only strong in certain situations. And again, also when more and more sets are released and the card pool gets bigger and bigger, then I think that you are going to see more one-offs in every deck. And yeah, those one-offs can be really powerful, but you need to know the circumstances when those one-offs are going to be strong. And you can only achieve that with testing the deck and see for yourself. Because if you don't and you just copy a deck from someone else, you don't know the purpose of every card in that deck. So then you get into situations when certain cards just don't feel very strong or feel underwhelming. And you question, why is this card even in this deck? If you don't know the circumstances when you want to play these cards, or against which decks these cards are powerful and why they are in the deck in the first place. So all this information you can only get with testing the decks. So the decks that you copied from someone else, but also the decks that you build for yourself. So when you build decks for yourself, chances of you knowing the purpose of every card are higher, but you still need to test if it also works, not only on paper, but also works in real matches, of course. When you're testing the decks, just analyze the decks, see the patterns of the deck. Even if you win a lot, you can still make changes to it. You can analyze against which decks does my deck struggle, so you can maybe make some changes to the deck or maybe make some changes to the sideboard to have a better matchup against those decks. Something that I also do is I want to see if my deck can survive against the early game. against really aggressive decks like Sabine or Aggro Boba Fett. And then a thing that you can do to save time is just play the 4 rounds to see if you can survive the early game. And then you don't have to play the game to an end. You don't need to see who wins. The information that you need and that you can analyze afterwards is just how does it look for me after just 4 rounds against these really aggressive decks. That is something that you can do to save a little bit of time. But like I said, a more in-depth video of this in the future when the competitive circuit starts to pop up. That was just something that I wanted to share with you before we dive into the deck. So Cassian Aggression, an aggression heroism leader with the ability on the undeployed side for an action, a resource and an exhaust. If you've dealt 3 or more damage to an enemy base this phase, you can draw a card. Then on the deployed side, it has a stat line of 4/6 with Saboteur, great against Iron Versio and Chewy, or just other annoying Sentinel units. And then again the same ability, but now when you deal damage to an enemy base, you may draw a card. Use this ability only once each round. So now it's not 3 or more, it's just when you deal damage, you can draw a card. So the power of Cassian comes with the draw ability of his leader. There are not a lot of cards in Star Wars Unlimited yet that can draw you a lot of cards. So having this printed on your leader is actually quite powerful, especially because you can filter through your deck more easily than your opponent. So you have more chances of seeing the units that you need in the particular situation that you're in. So then the base, so this is a double aggression deck. Maybe you've already seen it with the thumbnail and the title of this video, but I went for the double aggression route for Cassian. Why? Mainly because of Saw Gerrera. When this card was spoiled, and I'm going to talk more about Saw when I get to the card, but I just really thought that this was a well-designed card and I wanted to build a deck with Saw. And Saw itself is double aggression, so that makes it easy to choose the base for Cassian. So I went with the 30 health base. That's something that I always do when I first build a deck. I just want to see if it can survive against aggro decks, and if I can think about including the rare base with 25 health, or if my opponent is just quicker in dealing damage to my base than me. Maybe that's a little bit strange when I play a double aggression deck. Chances of me being the aggressor are higher than my opponent, but still this is just something that I do for every deck, so also for Cassian, and this is just how I build my decks. I just want to see how this deck does with a 30 health base, and if I feel comfortable, so then I will switch it to Tarkin Town. So when I do another video for Cassian Aggression after some testing, then you will see if I stuck to the 30 health base or if I indeed found the 25 health base at Tarkin Town stronger. So by all means, if you think Tarkin Town is better, just run Tarkin Town and let me know what you think. So let's start with the ground units, and let's start with Benthic 2 tubes. I played 3 copies of Benthic in this deck. It's just there for mainly the ability, his on-attack ability, give a friendly aggression unit rate 2. So this is a 1-cost unit, so great for opening the game in your first round. Play Benthic, but this is also a low-cost unit that still is viable mid to late game, because there are big threats on the board, and then you can sneak in a Benthic later on, and maybe your opponent overlooks his ability and thinks that there are bigger threats on the board that I have to deal with now, and then Benthic is a sneaky card to deal more damage to your opponent's base or to their bigger units. So it's a great card for your early game, but it keeps its value mid to late game, and that's why it's a great card in my opinion, and I include 3 copies of Benthic in this deck. So then the second card is the Jedi Agitator. The Jedi Agitator is a 2-cost unit with the Saboteur keyword, just like Cassian, your leader himself. You have a way of dealing with those annoying Sentinel units, or if your opponent plays a lot of shields, then this unit becomes powerful, but also his on-attack ability If you control a leader unit, deal 2 damage to a ground unit or a base. And especially that second part, or at the end, or the base, is what makes this card so powerful with Cassian. So you can enable Cassie's ability to draw a card with the Jedi Agitator. So it's an on attack when you control the leader. And I think that Cassian with 6 HP is also a great aggression leader that can stick on the board a little bit longer than, let's say, Sabine, for instance. So that's why the combination of the Jedi Agitator with Cassian and Cassian's ability is, this card just works great with the leader. So that's why I included 3 copies of him in my deck. So the third card is the Partisan Insurgent, 3 copies. I do play a lot of aggression units, of course, in this deck. So I think that his ability, when you have another aggression unit on the board, the Partisan Insurgent gets rate 2. You can reliably trigger this ability and make him 3/4 for just 2 resources. And then it just becomes a really resource efficient attacker for you. So that's why I include 3 copies of him in this deck. So then the Rebel Pathfinder, 3 copies of the Rebel Pathfinder in my deck. And, it's basically there for Saboteur and to deal with the Sentinels and the shields from my opponent. And just the 2/3 stat line is good enough for a 2-cost unit. Then Fighters for Freedom, 3 copies of Fighters for Freedom, which I think is a really powerful card in this deck, and just in general, by the way. Again, Saboteur, so I actually have a lot of ways to deal with Sentinel, which is, of course, the biggest counter to this deck that wants to deal damage to the base. So having Saboteurs in your deck is important. But especially the ability, besides Saboteur, when you play another aggression card, so this also triggers with events, which is important, you may deal 1 damage to the base. And it's not just the first aggression card every round, but every time you play an aggression card, you can deal a damage to the base. And in this deck, we also play a lot of cheaper units, so you can get multiple triggers of the Fights for Freedom in 1 round. And then, so this is a card that deals damage to your opponent's base, so you can then again trigger Cassian's ability to draw a card, and they just work great together. So then the Fleet Lieutenant. So not all my cards are heroism, like I said, or like I mentioned earlier, but they are all rebels. And if you play a rebel deck, you automatically include the Fleet Lieutenant. Just that 2 extra attack when you play this card on one of your friendly rebel units is just really powerful for just 3 resources. So a nice stat line, and the added 2 power to another friendly rebel unit is just, what makes this, in my opinion, an auto-include in every rebel deck, just as the Snowtrooper Lieutenant is an auto-include for all the Imperial decks for now. So nothing much to say about this unit. So then K2SO. And K2SO works perfect with Cassian. It is as if the designers of this game did this intentional. It has Overwhelm, it has a nice stat line of 4/4, and it has a when defeated ability. For each opponent, choose 1, either deal 3 damage to their base, or they have to discard a card. A lot of times you just want to do the 3 damage to the base. That is exactly enough to trigger Cassian's ability. Like I said, it's like the designers intentionally did this. But again, just the choice of dealing damage or making your opponent discard a card is a nice bonus for K2SO. Because if you know your opponent is holding a powerful card that can counter your plan for this round, and they only have 2 cards in their hand, for instance, or 3, then maybe you can choose to let them discard a card, and hopefully they discard that powerful card. But I think most times you just want to deal that 3 damage, because that is the win condition of this deck. And I mean, it is the win condition of every deck, but with Cassian you do get the added ability of also drawing your cards. So then Saw Gerrera, one of the cards why I wanted to build this deck, or at least why I went the double aggression route. When they revealed this card, I thought that this card was well designed. And it is a little bit of control, but in a really aggression way. So they don't have to pay more resources for their events, for instance. I think that that is something that Vigilance does. But you deal damage to their base whenever they play an event. And this is, again, not just the first event that they play, but for every event that they play, they have to deal 2 damage to their base. So it's great for the win condition, and it's great for the Cassian ability. So I think overall a win-win, and therefore also these 2 cards work perfectly together. So then 2 copies of Zep. Zep is just there because I think it's a powerful card. Not only the stat line 5/5, but his ability is great to deal with annoying units from your opponent. So if your opponent has a Sentinel, you can attack it with Zep, of course, or you have to attack it with Zep. But with Zep's ability, you can then also deal damage to another annoying unit, or the unit that they want to protect with the Sentinel units. So you can deal a lot of damage with Zep, and that's why I included 2 copies of him in this deck. Just a powerful unit in my opinion. So then the last ground unit is the Guerrilla Attack Bot, a card that actually won me a lot of games when I played it. This is just a really powerful unit with the grit ability, but you do include it because of the when played effect. If your base has 15 or more damage on it, this comes in ready, or you ready this unit. So you do want to play this, I think, when your base has 15 or more health. And why? Because this is better than ambush, because with ambush you can only attack your opponent's units, but the Guerrilla Attack Bot can actually sneak in the last 4 damage to your opponent's base when they are not expecting it. So that's what makes this card so good. And again, what makes it good in Cassian is because you can directly deal damage to your opponent's base. So that is the ground, 28 units in total. So let's go to the space. So we start off with a simple Alliance X-Wing. Just in general, a nice heroic unit with a decent stat line for just 2 resources. And yeah, nothing more to say about this. It's just a vanilla and therefore the stat line. So next card is the Green Squadron A-Wing, a really powerful aggression heroism space unit that I think that you are going to see in every aggression heroism deck with rate 2, so it actually can deal a lot of damage to your opponent. And yeah, for 2, this is just an amazing card. And like I said, if you play an aggression heroism deck, then I think that you will always see 3 copies of the A-Wing because it is that powerful. So then 2 copies of the red 3. I do think that this again is also a really powerful card, but I do play a lot of non-heroism units. And then this card just becomes a little bit less powerful because it only buffs your heroism units and not your aggression units. But I do think I play enough heroism units to include this card, and it's just that good. Because it has a rate 1 itself, so it has a stat line of 3/3 for a 3 cost, and it also boosts all your other heroism units. It even gives your leader rate 1, and yeah, that's why I still included the red 3 2 times in this deck, because I think it's just a really powerful card, and usually I want to play 3 copies of him, and maybe I will change it to 3 copies after some testing. But for now, let's stick with 2 and see how it goes. So then 3 copies of Wing Leader is just there for the same reason as the Fleet Lieutenant. Not all my units are heroism, but they all are rebels. And to give 2 experience tokens to one of the rebel units is just really powerful. And you can actually turn one of your units to a big threat for your opponent with the Wing Leader. When they are not expecting it. And you know, the strength of this for a card like this is that you can choose either space or ground. So if you know that your opponent is maybe less powerful in one of the arenas, or they only played ground units so far, you can put the 2 experience tokens to, let's say, the A-Wing, and then now all of a sudden you do have a really big threat in space that your opponent has to counter with another space unit or an event. So then 1 copy of the black one. Maybe this is a little bit of an oddball in the deck because Cassian already draws a lot. Then to include a card that becomes better when you have less cards in your hand seems a little bit odd. But because a lot of units are cheap, I do think that you cycle through your hand enough to include 1 copy of the black one. Drawing 3 cards or 6 cards in total, because this triggers when played and when defeated, I think is powerful enough to at least include 1 copy of the black one. Maybe this is the unit that I'm going to take out later on after some testing to include the 3rd copy of red 3. But I think that it is an interesting idea that I want to try out, and yeah, I will let you know how it went. Those are all the space units, so let's continue to the events. And we'll start with Heroic Sacrifice. So K2SO is already an important unit in your deck, but in combination with Heroic Sacrifice, it becomes even stronger. So what Heroic Sacrifice does is that you can draw a card. So again, you draw a card. You can attack with a unit. That unit gets +2 attack value, or power value, I should say. And then in combination with the Overwhelm of K2SO, so your chances of triggering Cassian's ability increases. And after the attack, you have to defeat the unit. So usually that's a drawback to this card, but in combination with K2SO, and that's also why the art of Heroic Sacrifice is K2SO. They work so well together because K2SO has a when defeated ability to deal even more damage to your opponent's base. So the combination of Heroic Sacrifice and K2SO is what makes this deck so powerful, I believe. So then 2 copies of Open Fire. They are just there to deal with annoying units. So this deck doesn't run a lot of spot removal, but like Aggression should, it's just removal by defeating your opponent's units, and then Open Fire is a great card to achieve that. So just dealing 4 damage to a unit, either ground or space for 3 resources is actually, I think, nice value. So that's why I included 2 copies of this event in my deck. So then we are running a double aggression deck, so I think then you always run 3 copies of the double aggression legendary. Just a really powerful card. So the flexibility is what makes this card good, or what makes all these double aspect legendaries good. So you can choose 2, either draw a card, so again card draw to cycle through your deck. You can defeat upgrades, so when you play against Shirut, for instance, that plays a lot of lightsabers, or a villain force deck that plays fallen lightsabers, or just Tarkin or Luke that deals out a lot of experience and shields. This is a great way to get rid of those. Then ready a unit with 3 or less power. It's also powerful in this deck because we do run some units with raid, so their power value is 3 or less, but they still trigger the raid when they attack, of course. So then you can actually attack a second time with a unit that has raid, and that is just really nice value. And then deal 4 damage to a unit. That's just Open Fire included. So again, like I said, to deal with the annoying Sentinel units or just annoying units in general. So then to close out this deck list, 2 copies of Bombing Run. So this is a quite expensive event to run an aggression deck, but I do think that this deck or this card is able to save you in a matchup that you are losing. So especially, of course, when you're losing in one of the 2 arenas, this is great to catch up to your opponent and to get rid of annoying units with just 1 card. So if you are falling behind on either the ground unit or the space unit, you play the Bombing Run, and now all of a sudden you can start the race or the race for dominance in that arena again, and hopefully this time you win. So it's a great card to play when you're behind, because you do have to damage your own units. So ideally you want to play it in an arena where your opponent has a lot of stronger units that you can defeat, and you ideally don't have units there or less units there. So that's the 50 card deck. Then I also included a sideboard for this deck list, 2 copies of Precision Fire. So there are already saboteurs in this deck to deal with sentinels and shields from your opponent. But yeah, when saboteur is printed on the deck, your opponent can actually maneuver around those saboteurs and defeat them before you can trigger their saboteur. To surprise your opponent with giving saboteur to units that from themselves don't have saboteur printed on them, it can actually really surprise your opponent when they think that they are safe, and now all of a sudden you can just attack their base and hopefully win the game. So that's yeah. And also we do run a lot of troopers, so you also get to trigger the +2 on the power value, and that's just a great value for a 1-cost event. So then another card in the sideboard is a Power Failure. It's mainly there against Shirut that plays a lot of lightsabers, or like I said, the Force villain decks that play the Fallen lightsabers. Especially Shirut starts to pop up in my local game store. So that's why I included 2 copies of this deck. And you know, it's even there if your opponent plays Tarkin or Luke Skywalker, and they make the mistake by putting all their experience or shield tokens on just 1 unit. So with this event, you can get rid of all those upgrades with 1 action. So then the 3rd card in my sideboard is Wolf. It's another unit with Saboteur, so that's a nice bonus. But I especially included in my sideboard for his ability, his when played and on attack ability, to prevent your opponent from healing their base. So this is especially good against decks like Item Versio that wants to heal her base, or Chewie that plays a lot of units with Restore. So then you can just include 2 copies of Wolf in your deck to prevent your opponent from healing their base, because yourself, you don't want to heal your base at all, so you don't feel the negative effects of this ability. So then, for a cause I believe in. So originally I wanted to include this card in the deck itself, but then I figured that not all my cards are heroism. And when you play For a Cause I Believe In, you do want to at least do 3 damage to your opponent, ideally 4 of course. But with this deck, you're not guaranteed to do the 3 or 4 damage, because we run a lot of aggression only units, and therefore I put it in my sideboard. Because I do think that this card becomes stronger mid to late game when you cycle through all your aggression or most of your aggression units, because they are your cheap units. So you either play them or you played them previously and they are defeated. So chances of your deck containing more heroism cards increases mid to late game. So that's why I included 2 copies of this card in the sideboard. And then lastly, Rallying Cry. We do run double aggression, so it feels strange to not include the double aggression event. It's a 3-cost event that gives all your units rate 2. So the timing of this card is really important, because you do want to have at least 3 units on your board when you play this card, I think. And you also need to be able to attack with these units. And I think that's the hardest part to fulfill. So when do you want to play this card? When your opponent either already claimed the initiative, and you are free to do what you want. When your opponent already exhausted all their resources, so they cannot, especially when you play against Cunning for instance, they cannot play waylays or outmaneuvers to exhaust all of your units. When you see a window when you can play Rallying Cry, so especially, like I said, against decks that don't have a lot of spot removal or ways to exhaust your units, then this becomes a really powerful card, but it's just not good against every deck. So that's why it is in the sideboard. So that was the deck. Now what's left to do is test the deck and see if it is as powerful as I think that it is. And yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to show you my starting point instead of just my final result. So I will do another deck tech video in a couple of weeks and show you the final result after testing. And then I will talk more deeply about why I swapped out some of the cards and my findings after testing, and which cards worked and which cards were underperforming, but that is for the future. So for now, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe. That would help this channel out a lot. Stay tuned for more deck tech videos. I already have an idea for the next deck tech. That's going to be a double Cunning Boba deck. And especially because I want to try out if I can build a strong deck with Jabba and his ability to make trick cards or trick events cheaper. So stay tuned for that. Again, thank you for watching and take care. Bye.